20 doctors couldn't save the CEO. Then a single dad janitor spotted what they all missed. Sometimes the most brilliant minds overlook what exhausted eyes see clearly at 3 a.m. Claire Harrington was dying in the most expensive hospital room money could buy, and 20 of America's finest physicians couldn't figure out why. Meanwhile, Owen Martinez was mopping blood from the emergency room floor, 16 hours into his shift as a night janitor. But when he glimpsed her symptoms, his tired mind snapped to attention. He recognized something the doctors had missed, something he'd seen before during the worst week of his life. Mount Sinai Medical Center's executive wing didn't usually admit patients at 2 a.m. The mahogany-paneled halls and Persian rugs were designed for scheduled procedures, not emergencies. But when the CEO of Harrington Industries collapsed during a charity gala, protocols bent the way light bends around massive objects. Money has that effect. Owen pushed his mop bucket past the crowd of specialists, invisible in his gray uniform. He was a single father, a night janitor, an invisible man. His existence was measured in floors cleaned, bills paid, and homework checked. But his eyes caught everything, a habit born from the vigilance that comes with raising a daughter alone. Inside the executive suite, Dr. Richard Pemberton addressed his assembled team. Kidney function declining, liver enzymes spiking, but no clear etiology, he announced. Harvard medical graduate, 30 years of experience, a man whose voice treated each word like currency. We need to think beyond conventional paradigms. Owen kept his head down, wringing the mop with practiced efficiency. He'd learned to work around importance, to clean up catastrophe, without disturbing those who mattered. But as he worked, Claire Harrington's symptoms pulled at something deep in his memory. The particular pallor of her skin, the way her fingers trembled with a specific rhythm. The details were hauntingly familiar. No, he thought, it couldn't be. As he emptied the waste bin, he glanced at her chart. The symptoms lined up like dominoes in his mind, each one triggering a memory he'd tried to bury. 4 years ago. Different hospital. Different patient. The same mysterious decline. Environmental toxins? Suggested Dr. Kim, the youngest of the specialists. Her company handles chemical manufacturing. Already tested. Pemberton dismissed her idea with a wave. Twice. Focus on autoimmune possibilities. Owen's hands tightened on the mop handle. They were looking in all the wrong places, and he knew it. But who would listen to a janitor? He was background noise, human furniture. His associate degree from community college, abandoned when his daughter Lily arrived, meant nothing in this room full of specialists. "Excuse me," Owen said quietly. 20 heads didn't turn. He might as well have been the ventilation system humming in the background. "Excuse me," he repeated, louder this time. Dr. Pemberton's gaze finally found him, irritation creasing his features. "Yes?" "Her symptoms. Has anyone checked for—" "Sir, this is a medical consultation. Please finish your duties quietly." Owen nodded, the muscle memory of deference taking over. He returned to mopping, but his mind wouldn't quiet. The tremor pattern, the specific shade of gray creeping up from her nail beds, the way her breathing hitched every 37 seconds. He'd counted those hitches before, sat beside another bed, holding another hand, watching the same mysterious poison steal someone away while doctors chased ghosts. By 4 a.m., Claire Harrington's condition had deteriorated further. Owen watched through the doorway as monitors sang their electronic panic. More doctors arrived. More theories flew through the air. More tests were ordered. But none of them would find it. He knew that with crushing certainty. Owen finished his shift at 6 a.m. Instead of heading home to get some sleep, he detoured to the hospital library. Ancient medical texts and modern journals lived side by side there, most unopened for years. Everything was digital now. But Owen remembered the feel of pages, the weight of knowledge held in your hands. He found what he was looking for in a toxicology manual from 1987. A single paragraph described a compound so rare that most modern tests didn't screen for it. It was thallium-based but modified. The compound had been used briefly in early chemotherapy trials before being banned. It was nearly impossible to detect unless you knew exactly what to look for. Owen photocopied the page with shaking hands. 4 years ago, he'd found this same information, but he'd been 12 hours too late. At home, his daughter Lily sat at the kitchen table, already dressed for school. 9 years old and self-sufficient by necessity, she was fixing her cereal with the careful movements of a child who'd learned not to wake tired parents. "Dad, you okay?" she asked, looking up at him. Owen forced a smile. "Just a long night, baby. How's the science project coming?" "Almost done. Mrs. Chen says it's really good." She studied him with eyes that missed nothing, her mother's eyes. "You look worried." "Just thinking about work stuff." He kissed her forehead, inhaling the simple sweetness of her strawberry shampoo. "Bus comes in 20 minutes. After Lily left for school, Owen sat at the kitchen table with the photocopied page spread in front of him. He could leave it alone, keep his head down, stay invisible, stay safe. But he remembered another morning, another kitchen, another decision made too late. The price of silence, measured in absence. He called the hospital and asked for the executive wing. The receptionist's tone shifted when he identified himself as janitorial staff. "Is this about scheduling?" "I need to speak with Dr. Pemberton about Claire Harrington. It's urgent." "I'm sure the doctor is very busy. Perhaps you could speak with your supervisor." Owen hung up. The direct approach wouldn't work. He'd learned that lesson 4 years ago, calling doctor after doctor, trying to explain what grief had taught him to see. They hadn't listened then either. That evening, Owen arrived for his shift early. He made his way to the lab, using his access card to enter areas usually beyond his domain. Janitors went everywhere and saw everything, yet remained invisible. They were the perfect witnesses to disaster. He pulled Claire Harrington's latest blood work and compared the values to the textbook page he'd photocopied. The patterns aligned with mathematical precision. The numbers were elevated but not quite flagged as critical. They looked like subtle variations, the kind that could be dismissed as lab error, unless you knew the specific constellation they formed. "What are you doing here?" Owen turned to find Dr. Kim, the young specialist from earlier, watching him. Her expression held curiosity rather than accusation. "Looking at the Harrington tests," Owen admitted. There was no point in lying. "You can read lab results?" 2 years of pre-med," Owen said, then gestured vaguely at his uniform, at the life that had derailed his dreams. "Before." Dr. Kim moved closer, peering at the papers spread across the counter. "What are you seeing?" Owen laid out the photocopied page beside the lab results. Modified thallium compound. It was used in experimental cancer treatments in the 80s. It creates this specific pattern of organ failure. "But we tested for heavy metals." "Standard panels won't catch it," Owen interrupted. "The modification makes it almost invisible unless you run a specific assay." His finger traced the data points. "See how the kidney and liver values spike in sequence? And the 37-second intervals in respiratory distress?" Dr. Kim's eyes widened as she followed his explanation. "How could you possibly know that?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've seen it before." "Where?" "This compound has been banned for decades." Someone who worked in pharmaceutical disposal. Accidental exposure to old medical waste. The half-truth tasted bitter on his tongue. "By the time anyone listened to me, it was too late." Dr. Kim studied him with new interest, seeing him differently now. "Show me everything." For the next hour, Owen walked her through the evidence. Each symptom, each test result, each telltale sign the doctors had missed because they weren't looking for ghosts from medical history. Kim listened carefully, asked sharp questions, and began seeing the pattern he'd been screaming about in silence for hours. "We need to tell Pemberton," she said finally, gathering the papers. "He won't listen. Not from me." "Then I'll tell him." She looked at Owen directly. "Come with me." The executive wing conference room fell silent as Owen entered behind Dr. Kim. 20 specialists turned to stare at the janitor entering their sanctum, a space he was supposed to clean, not occupy. "Dr. Kim?" Pemberton's voice held a warning. "What is this?" "Dr. Pemberton, I believe we've been looking at this wrong." Kim spread the papers across the conference table. "Mr. Martinez has identified something we missed." Pemberton's gaze flicked to Owen, dismissive. "The janitor?" "2 years pre-med at Columbia," Kim supplied, "and personal experience with this exact poisoning. This is highly irregular." "The compound is a modified thallium derivative," Owen interrupted, finding his voice. "It was used in experimental oncology before being banned. It mimics standard organ failure, but with specific markers." He pointed to the test results. "The intervals are diagnostic. 37 seconds for respiratory distress, kidney-liver cascade in 12-hour cycles." "Preposterous," Dr. Harrison from nephrology scoffed. "We'd have caught any heavy metal poisoning." "Not this one." Owen pulled out a medical journal from 1989. 7 documented cases, all missed by standard screening. It required specific chromatography to detect. The room erupted in skeptical voices, doctors talking over each other. Owen stood quietly, watching their resistance, remembering another room, another group of doctors, another dismissal that had cost him everything. "It killed my wife," he said quietly. The room stilled immediately. The silence was absolute. 4 years ago, Owen continued, his voice steady and factual, Sophie worked in medical waste disposal. Accidental exposure to improperly stored compounds from the 80s. 12 doctors saw her. 15 specialists consulted. Everyone missed it because they weren't looking for something that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. He paused, the weight of memory in his words. "I found the answer 12 hours after she died." The silence stretched like surgical wire, taut and painful. Dr. Kim broke it. "The timeline fits perfectly. The symptoms match. We need to run the specific assay." Pemberton's face cycled through disbelief, irritation, and finally uncomfortable consideration. "The liability of missing something like this is less important than saving her life," Owen finished. Another long silence filled the room as Pemberton weighed his options. Then he nodded curtly. "Run the test. If Mr. Martinez is correct, we'll need to start chelation therapy immediately." Owen sagged slightly as exhaustion hit him like a wave. They'd listened. This time, they'd actually listened. Dr. Kim touched his arm gently. "Can you stay? Walk us through the treatment protocol from those case studies?" Owen thought of Lily waiting at home with Mrs. Chen next door, of the floors that still needed cleaning, of bills that demanded steady paychecks. But he heard himself say, "Yes." The test results came back 2 hours later, and they confirmed what Owen had feared. Positive for the modified compound, with levels that were dangerously high. Now, the same room full of specialists who had dismissed him just hours earlier hung on his every word, as he carefully walked them through the historical treatment protocols he'd spent years studying. "Prussian blue won't work alone," Owen explained, his exhaustion making him choose each word carefully. "The modification in this compound requires DMSA chelation, administered at specific intervals. If we go too fast, we trigger organ shutdown. If we go too slow, the damage becomes irreversible." He was drawing from memory now, from those countless nights spent memorizing medical texts in hospital waiting rooms while Sophie fought for her life, from the desperate research he'd conducted that came too late to save her. But this time, all that knowledge would actually matter. This time, he could make a difference. Dr. Pemberton took charge of supervising the treatment personally, following Owen's outlined protocol with absolute precision. The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. The earlier skepticism had been replaced by urgent, focused determination. Claire Harrington's life was hanging in the balance, and somehow the janitor was the one holding the scales. During a brief break in the treatment, Dr. Kim turned to Owen with a puzzled expression. Who would even have access to this compound? It's been banned for 30 years. Owen shrugged, his mind already working through the possibilities. Old medical facilities, maybe. Improper disposal sites. Black market medical supplies. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. Or someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Was this an accident, or was it intentional? But that question would have to wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was saving a life. By morning, Claire Harrington's vital signs had finally stabilized. The chelation was working, slowly but surely pulling the poison from her system with agonizing precision. Owen stayed through it all, monitoring her responses, adjusting the protocols, and teaching 20 different specialists about a ghost from medical history that most of them had never even heard of. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Lily. "Dad, where are you? I made breakfast." Guilt twisted painfully in his stomach. He typed back quickly. "Sorry, baby. Emergency at work. Mrs. Chen can take you to school?" Her response came almost immediately. "Already asked her. You okay?" "I'm okay. Helping with something important." "Okay. Love you." "Love you too." Dr. Kim approached him a moment later carrying coffee and a sandwich. "Thought you might need these." Owen accepted both gratefully, suddenly becoming aware that he hadn't eaten anything in 24 hours. "Thanks. I looked you up," she said quietly, settling into the chair beside him. "Columbia, full scholarship. Top of your class before—" She trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish. "Before life happened," Owen filled in for her, taking a bite of the sandwich and tasting nothing. "Your wife," Dr. Kim continued carefully. "I found the medical journals from 4 years ago. There's an article about unidentified toxicity in medical waste workers." He nodded slowly. "Sophie Martinez. They published the article after she died, but they still didn't name the specific compound. Too much liability, I guess." "I'm sorry. That must have been—" "It was." Owen cut her off gently, not unkindly. "But right now we have a chance to save this one. That's what matters." The next 12 hours blurred together into a continuous cycle of monitoring, adjusting, and watching as the poison slowly retreated and life gradually crept back into Claire Harrington's body. She remained unconscious but stable throughout. The immediate crisis had passed, at least for now. Owen finally left the hospital as his next shift was approaching. He was waiting for the elevator when Dr. Pemberton caught up with him, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Martinez?" the older doctor began, his discomfort clearly palpable. "I owe you an apology. And honestly, a debt I can never repay." Owen stayed quiet, too exhausted for the complicated social navigation this conversation would require. "If you hadn't persisted, if you hadn't kept pushing," Pemberton continued, "we would have lost her. All our combined expertise, all our years of training, and we completely missed what you saw immediately." "You weren't looking for it," Owen said simply. "Why would you be? This compound isn't supposed to exist anymore." "Still," Pemberton cleared his throat awkwardly, "the board will want to thank you properly. There'll be some kind of compensation, I'm sure." "I just want her to live," Owen interrupted, stepping out as the elevator doors opened. "That's all I ever wanted." He walked away before Pemberton could respond, before the gratitude could become more awkward, before the vast gulf between their two worlds could reassert itself completely. He had floors to clean, a daughter to raise, a life to somehow maintain. But first, there was a mystery to solve. Because during those long, quiet hours of watching Claire Harrington fight for her life, a deeply troubling question had taken root in his mind. How exactly did she encounter a compound that had been banned for 30 years? Sophie's exposure had been accidental, easily traceable to specific disposal sites and documented safety violations. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. Owen clocked in for his regular shift, pushing his cleaning cart through the familiar hallways he'd walked 1,000 times before. But his mind stayed firmly in that executive suite, carefully parsing through possibilities. Who had access to this kind of compound? Who had a motive to use it? And more importantly, who knew enough about obscure medical history to choose such a specific, such an unusual poison? Owen! He turned to find Nurse Patricia approaching, one of the very few staff members who actually used his name instead of just, "Hey," or "Excuse me." "Heard you caused quite a stir upstairs," she said with a knowing smile. "Showed up all the fancy doctors with their degrees and their egos." "I just recognized something they didn't," Owen said simply. Patricia studied him with that shrewd look she got sometimes. "Also heard it was personal for you. Related to your Sophie." Owen nodded, not quite trusting himself with words at that moment. "Well, good for you then," Patricia said firmly, squeezing his shoulder with genuine warmth. "About time someone reminded those people that wisdom doesn't always come with diplomas framed on the wall." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Sophie would be proud of you, Owen. Real proud." As Patricia disappeared down the hallway, Owen returned to his routine with mechanical efficiency. Floors didn't clean themselves, after all. Bills didn't pause for medical mysteries or personal investigations. But between each task, in those quiet moments of repetitive work, his mind kept working the problem like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Claire Harrington, CEO of a major chemical company. Someone who would have direct access to all kinds of industrial compounds. But why would someone poison her with something so specific, so archaic, so deliberately obscure? Unless they knew she wouldn't be tested for it. Unless they were counting on modern medicine's blind spots, on the fact that doctors wouldn't even think to look for a compound that had been banned decades ago. By 3 in the morning, Owen had finished cleaning the emergency department and had moved on to the surgical wing. It was quieter here, less chaos to clean up after. He found himself standing outside the records room, staring at the electronic lock gleaming in the dim hallway light. His keycard wouldn't work here, of course. This was above his clearance level. But night security was always thin, spread too far across too much hospital. And janitors, well, janitors were essentially invisible. He'd learned that particular truth long ago. 20 minutes later, Owen sat alone in the darkness, Claire Harrington's corporate files glowing on the computer screen in front of him. CEO for 7 years. Aggressive expansion into pharmaceutical disposal services, acquiring smaller companies at a rapid pace. His hands went completely still on the keyboard. Pharmaceutical disposal. Just like Sophie's company. Just like the source of the poison that had killed her. He dug deeper, his heart beginning to pound. Harrington Industries had acquired several smaller disposal companies 4 years ago, right around the time Sophie died. And one company name in particular made his breath catch painfully in his throat. Med Waste Solutions. Sophie's employer. Owen's mind raced as connections began forming, patterns emerging from data he'd never thought to connect before. Why hadn't he seen this before? Why hadn't he put these pieces together? Because he'd been drowning in grief, he realized. Because he'd had a 5-year-old daughter to raise all alone. Because some mysteries simply hurt too much to solve when you're just trying to survive. His hands shaking now, he started printing everything he could find. SEC filings, acquisition documents, employee records showing systematic termination immediately after the buyout. Safety violations carefully buried in regulatory footnotes that no one would ever read. By the time dawn began breaking outside the windows, Owen had developed a theory. And it was horrifying in its brutal simplicity. He found Dr. Kim in the cafeteria a few hours later, exhaustion painting dark shadows under her eyes. "She's stable," Kim reported before he could even ask the question. Responding well to the treatment. Should wake up soon, actually. I need to show you something, Owen said urgently, spreading his printed pages out between coffee cups and breakfast trays. Claire Harrington's company bought out my wife's employer, right before the so-called accident started. Kim frowned, scanning the documents with growing concern. Accidents? What accidents? 4 workers exposed to improperly stored medical waste over the span of 18 months. All of them at facilities that Harrington Industries had just acquired. Owen pointed to specific dates, names, locations. Sophie was the 3rd one to die. You think? Kim looked up at him, her face pale. What? Corporate negligence? Or corporate murder? Owen said, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Think about it. You buy companies that have toxic liabilities, massive cleanup costs. You expose workers to those toxins, make it look accidental. You collect the insurance payouts, and you avoid the expensive cleanup entirely. The workers' deaths become a convenient solution to an expensive problem. Kim's face had gone completely white. Surely no one would actually do something like that. Unless someone found out, Owen continued, his voice hardening. Unless someone discovered what Claire Harrington had really done and decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. Someone with access to the compound. Someone who knew exactly what it had done to Sophie and the others. We have to tell someone, Kim said immediately, already reaching for her phone. The police, the administration. Tell them what? Owen interrupted, gathering up the papers. That I broke into restricted records after hours? That I'm accusing the woman we just saved of being a murderer? I'm a janitor, Dr. Kim. She's a CEO worth millions. Guess whose story they're going to believe? But Kim was already pulling out her phone with determination. My cousin works for the FBI, White-Collar Crime Division. If you're right about this, if there's even a chance you're right. If I'm right, Owen said slowly, then someone tried to execute Claire Harrington for crimes she thought she'd successfully buried. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The real question is, do we actually let them finish the job? Kim's hand froze on her phone, her eyes widening. You can't be serious right now. She killed Sophie, Owen said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Maybe not with her own hands, but with her signature on those acquisition papers, with her decision to cut safety protocols to maximize profits, with her choice to value money over human lives. And that justifies vigilante poisoning? Kim challenged. That makes it okay to become a murderer yourself? Owen fell quiet. Standing there in the harsh fluorescent cafeteria light, moral clarity wavered like vision does when you're too tired to focus properly. Save a life. Seek justice. The 2 imperatives pulled him in completely opposite directions. No, he said finally, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. Sophie wouldn't want that. She believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Kim made the call. The FBI arrived that same afternoon. Discreet agents in unremarkable suits moving through the hospital like shadows. They interviewed Owen in the very same conference room where he'd fought so desperately to save Claire Harrington's life. The irony tasted bitter, like cold coffee left sitting too long. You're alleging that Ms. Harrington knowingly exposed workers to toxic substances? Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Lily's teacher Owen had already checked, kept her tone carefully neutral. I'm showing you a clear pattern. Owen laid out his evidence methodically, the way he'd practiced in his head 100 times. 4 workers over 18 months. Same compound in each case. All of them at recently acquired facilities with known toxic liabilities. And someone poisoned her with that same substance? Agent Chen's pen moved across her notepad. Someone who knew what it was. Someone who understood what it did. Someone who knew exactly how it killed people. Agent Chen studied him with sharp, evaluating eyes. You had access to this compound, Mr. Martinez. You had motive. Your wife was one of the victims. You had the medical knowledge to administer it properly. If I wanted her dead, Owen met her gaze steadily, would I have saved her life? Maybe you wanted her to suffer first, Agent Chen suggested. Maybe you wanted her to know why this was happening to her. Maybe you wanted her to feel what your wife felt. Owen kept his voice level. I spent 4 years raising my daughter, going to work every day, trying to rebuild some kind of life from the ruins. I only found out about this connection 12 hours ago. You can check the login records from the records room. We will, Agent Chen assured him. We'll be checking everything. The investigation expanded outward from that point like ripples moving across still water. More agents arrived. Harrington Industries' corporate offices were quietly raided. Records were subpoenaed. Employees were interviewed one by one. And through it all, Owen continued his regular shifts, pushing his mop past federal agents in dark suits and corporate lawyers in expensive ones. The invisible man suddenly visible in the worst possible way. Whispers followed him everywhere now. The janitor who saved the CEO, who accused her of murder, who might just be a killer himself. At home, Lily noticed everything. His exhaustion, his constant distraction, the way his mind seemed to be somewhere else entirely. Dad, what's wrong? Just grown-up stuff, baby, Owen said, trying to sound reassuring. But Lily wasn't satisfied with that answer. Is it about Mom? The question hit him like a physical blow. Lily rarely mentioned Sophie directly anymore, her memories fading like photographs left too long in sunlight. Kind of, Owen admitted, because lying to her had never felt right. Do you miss her? Every day. Without warning, Lily hugged him with that fierce suddenness only children possess. Me too. Even though I don't remember much anymore. Owen held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and innocence. Whatever happened with the investigations and accusations swirling around him, this moment was real. This love had survived everything else, and it would survive whatever came next. 3 days passed before Claire Harrington finally woke up. Owen heard about it through the hospital gossip network. The CEO was conscious but deeply confused, remembering nothing after her initial collapse. FBI agents were waiting to interview her. Lawyers had already begun circling like expensive, well-dressed sharks. Dr. Kim found Owen during his afternoon break. She's asking for you. What? Owen looked up from his coffee, certain he'd misheard. Claire Harrington. She knows you saved her life. She wants to thank you personally. Owen's stomach turned at the thought. Face the woman who might have killed Sophie? Accept her gratitude for his intervention? I don't think that's a good idea. The FBI cleared you of suspicion, Dr. Kim interrupted. But they want you there when they question her. You know the compound better than anyone else. You might be able to catch something if she's lying. An hour later, Owen found himself standing in Claire Harrington's private room. She looked so much smaller without Power's protective armor, pale, vulnerable, undeniably human. Not the corporate monster his grief had spent 4 years constructing in his mind. Mr. Martinez. Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but still clear. They tell me I owe you my life. Owen nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. 20 doctors with all their expertise, and it was the janitor who saw what they all missed. A weak smile crossed her face. There's probably a metaphor in there somewhere. Probably, Owen managed. Agent Chen entered then, followed closely by Claire's lawyer, a man whose suit probably cost more than Owen made in 3 months. Ms. Harrington, are you feeling up to answering some questions? Do I have a choice? Claire asked. You always have choices, Agent Chen replied evenly. Some of them just come with consequences. Claire's eyes sharpened despite her obvious physical weakness. Then ask your questions. Agent Chen methodically laid out the evidence they'd gathered. The acquired companies, the exposed workers, the suspicious patterns that emerged when you looked at all the data together. As she spoke, Claire's face shifted visibly from confusion to horror to carefully controlled fury. "You think I deliberately poisoned my own workers?" Her voice was incredulous. "Did you?" "God, no. Those were tragic accidents. Old facilities with poor record-keeping. We did our best to clean things up, and your best included cutting safety budgets by 60%. Owen heard his own voice interrupt, steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Ending hazmat protocols that had been in place for years. Deliberately ignoring contamination reports from facility managers." Claire's gaze found him across the room. "You're one of the families, aren't you? Your wife?" "Sophie Martinez. Medwaste Solutions. She died 4 years ago from exposure to the exact same compound that almost killed you." Something shifted in Claire's expression then. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation, the CEO mind still working even through the medication and weakness. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly. But business decisions aren't the same thing as murder." "Tell that to whoever poisoned you," Owen said quietly. The silence that followed stretched taut as a wire. Claire's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently in her ear. She waved him off with visible irritation. "Someone who worked at those facilities," Claire said slowly, working through the logic out loud. "Someone who knew about the compound, who understood what it was, who had direct access to it." Her CEO mind was clicking into gear despite her weakness. "The disposal team. There were 5 workers who got exposed over that period." "4," Owen corrected automatically. "No, 5. I remember specifically because legal made me personally sign off on all the settlement agreements." Claire's eyes narrowed as she searched her memory. "Martinez, Chen, Kowalski, Brown, and Jameson. But Jameson refused the settlement. Said he wasn't sick, that he hadn't been exposed." Agent Chen was already pulling up records on her tablet. "Robert Jameson, hazmat specialist at Medwaste Solutions, left the company voluntarily right after the acquisition. No record of any illness or insurance claims filed." "He knew," Claire said with quiet certainty. "He must have known what was stored there, what would eventually happen to anyone who came into contact with it." "You're suggesting he deliberately exposed his own co-workers?" Agent Chen's skepticism was clearly evident in her tone. "I'm suggesting he knew about valuable compounds being kept in illegal storage. Maybe he was planning to sell them on the black market. Then our acquisition disrupted everything." Claire's voice was growing stronger with certainty now. "Check his finances. See if he had any unexplained income before we bought the company." Owen's mind raced, pieces clicking into place. He was working the day Sophie got exposed. "I remember seeing his name on the incident report. He personally signed off on the containment area she was assigned to clean." Agent Chen was making rapid notes. "We'll look into it immediately. But right now, Ms. Harrington, you're still facing serious charges of criminal negligence regardless of this new information." "I'll cooperate fully with your investigation," Claire said firmly. Then her gaze found Owen again, and her voice softened slightly. "Whatever actually happened, your wife deserved so much better than what she got. They all did." It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was acknowledgement, which was somehow more than Owen had ever expected to receive. He left as more lawyers and agents descended on the room like a coordinated swarm. Out in the hallway, Dr. Kim was waiting for him. "You okay?" "I don't know," Owen admitted, leaning against the wall as exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed him. "For 4 years I blamed her, hated her with everything I had. And now it's complicated," Dr. Kim finished for him. "Everything's complicated," Owen agreed, pushing himself off the wall. "I still have floors to clean." But his shift was interrupted just an hour later by Agent Chen appearing at his side. "We found Jameson. He's been living under another name in Nevada, and he has significant unexplained income starting about 5 years ago." "Before the acquisition?" Owen asked. 6 months before, actually, right around when Medwaste first started storing those illegal compounds." Chen showed him financial records on her tablet. It looks like he was planning to sell them on the black market. Your wife and the others, they stumbled onto his cash by accident. So he exposed them deliberately, Owen said, the pieces finally forming a complete picture. To cover his tracks, to eliminate anyone who might know what he was doing. Then Harrington Industries bought the company and disrupted his entire plan. He lost access to the compounds, but he knew exactly who was responsible for destroying his lucrative scheme. So he poisoned her, Owen said, feeling hollow inside. Used the same compound that killed Sophie. Poetic justice, I guess. We're moving to arrest him right now, Chen said. Then she studied Owen carefully. You saved the life of someone you genuinely believed had killed your wife. How does that feel? Owen considered the question seriously. Like Sophie would be proud of me. She always used to say that doing the right thing wasn't about who deserved what. It was about who you choose to be, regardless of circumstances. The arrest made national headlines within hours. Disgraced hazmat worker turned corporate whistleblower turned murderer. The media absolutely loved the narrative, revenge served cold in chemical form, justice delivered through irony. What they mostly ignored were the 4 dead workers whose lives and deaths had started this entire chain of events in the first place. Claire Harrington recovered fully over the following weeks, at least physically. Harrington Industries faced massive fines, intense regulatory oversight, and criminal charges filed against the executives who'd signed off on the safety cuts. Claire herself managed to escape criminal prosecution, plausible deniability combined with extremely expensive lawyers, but her reputation was thoroughly destroyed. The business world had turned its back on her completely. She found Owen one last time, on the night before her official discharge from the hospital. I need you to know something, she said without preamble. She looked so much older now, all that power and confidence stripped completely away. I didn't know about the compound, about what Jameson was actually doing there. But I did know about the safety cuts. I knew we were putting workers at serious risk. Owen waited, saying nothing. I told myself it was acceptable risk, just the cost of doing business in that industry. I never imagined that. She stopped, struggling for words. That's not an excuse, I know it's not. But it's the truth. What do you want me to say? Owen asked. That I forgive you for what happened? No, Claire said firmly. I want you to know that I'm setting up a foundation. Full medical coverage for any workers who suffer industrial accidents. Scholarships for survivors' children. She handed him a business card. The Sophie Martinez Fund. Your daughter will have full tuition covered to any school she qualifies for. Owen stared down at the card in his hand. Was this blood money? A conscience balm? Or just a CEO desperately trying to buy some form of redemption? I can't undo what happened to your wife, Claire continued quietly. I can't bring back any of those 4 people who died. But I can try to prevent it from happening to others going forward. Maybe that was enough, Owen thought. Maybe it had to be enough. Owen slipped the card into his pocket. Thank you. He left her room for what he knew would be the last time, returning to his familiar mop and bucket waiting in the hallway. Tomorrow he would clean these same floors again. Next month, next year, the routine would continue. But Lily would have choices now, opportunities he could never have given her on his own. 6 months passed, and Owen found himself standing at the front of a community college classroom. Intro to Chemistry, night session. His students were workers just like him. Janitors, mechanics, retail clerks. People who were essentially invisible to the system they lived in, but who were seeking knowledge anyway, refusing to stay invisible. Who can tell me why we need to understand chemical compounds? He asked, looking out at their tired but attentive faces. A woman in the back row raised her hand. She was still wearing her fast food uniform from her shift. Because knowing things can save lives? Exactly right, Owen said, turning to the whiteboard. Sometimes the most important observer is the one nobody's watching. the one nobody thinks to ask. He began to teach then, sharing what Sophie had loved most, the beautiful logic of chemistry, the elegant patterns that revealed fundamental truth about the world. In the front row, Lily sat doing her homework, visibly proud of her dad, the teacher. The invisible man, finally visible at last. Not because he'd solved a mystery or saved a CEO's life, but because he was passing on knowledge to others the system had overlooked and dismissed. Sophie would have been so proud. Outside the classroom windows, night janitors were cleaning office buildings across the city, their essential work going unnoticed as always. Some of them would be sitting in Owen's classroom next semester, learning to see what others habitually missed. The cycle was continuing, but it was different now. Better. In the end, Owen realized, that's all anyone could really do. Take tragedy and transform it into purpose. Take invisibility and make it into insight. Take knowledge and share it freely with anyone willing to learn. Owen taught until late that night, his students taking careful notes, each of them understanding that education was so much more than degrees hanging on walls. It was power. It was vision. It was the ability to save lives when the critical moment finally arrived. And those moments always came, eventually, for those who knew how to see them.